Logan was sentenced to life. He
Jesus Christ. But the question is where? Where would it be? A resource.
Preachers say you'll never be broke another day in your life, and you broke the next day. Say that.
Romanos 6:8 y Romanos 8:1. Ahora leamos el versículo.
The Japanese fellow. That's right. The Japanese fellow. I could name him. That's it. So I'm Otani is my guy because he's the only one that I know. And with that, Clay, I've laid out the menu. I was going to let you order for where we dive in first here because there's so much to discuss. To me, first of all, there was a lot of stuff going on over the weekend, and we're going to hit it all. But to me, the story dropping Sunday night in the New York Times with Joe Biden surrounding the auto pin and the pardons, it was as I was reading it, I was like, oh man, this is a really big story. And I don't know how many people have recognized it yet, but let me just give you a couple of details that, to me, give an indication of how big this story could become. I didn't realize this, but Joe Biden didn't do an interview with the New York Times for his entire presence. I mean, again, if you were wondering about what they thought about his cognitive
Comiendo, colóquese el cinturón de seguridad y no maneje como about the importance, no matter the race or color of your skin, about wearing sunscreen when outdoors.
From what I've learned, our melanin only has a very small percentage of SPF, so I am consistently applying sunscreen for extra protection, as well as wearing a hat because I have gotten sunburned before as a Black person. So.
Absolutely, such good advice. Thank you so much for sharing your story and your skincare routine. Shauna, it's been a pleasure having you with us today here on the Black Information Network.
I'm Big Sue on the Black Information Network. Frederick McKinley Jones is the inventor of one of the most important inventions to modern agriculture, the refrigerated truck. He patented his refrigeration system in 1940. The system allowed perishable foods to be shipped to further distances and even overseas. It was installed in trucks, boats, planes, and boxcars and improved the worldwide food trade. Other concepts such as frozen foods, supermarkets, and container shipping were all derived from the work of Frederick Jones. And that's a fact. I'm Big Sue on the Black Information Network.
Your story is our story.
The Black Information.
From bad guys and they need their weapon, it's not in the...
And then when you go see go.
And you had this idea that the only way you'd ever get out, because you knew you were not guilty, the only way you'd ever get out was if you could, like, defend yourself and get your case reopened and re-examined. And so you started studying law, you became, a jailhouse lawyer, but before you even got to Angola, you were in the Orleans Parish Prison in New Orleans, which you said was worse than Angola. and you wanted to study law when you were there, but you had no access to law books. So one of your first lawsuits was suing to get a law book. So, who did you sue, the prison?
So I prepared a motion because at that time the Orleans Parish Prison did not provide law material to people that needed it. We didn't have a law library. So what I would generally do is write to people on the outside to provide me with Xerox copies of cases. But then that wasn't enough. So every time when I used to go to court, on a desk in the courthouse, they always had criminal code of procedures. So I figured that was the book that I needed. So one of my first motions that I filed was a motion for a law book. I prepared the motion and then filed it with the Louisiana Supreme Court. But the judges say, look, you filed it in the wrong court. You should have filed it in the trial court. So then at that time, they remanded it from the Louisiana Supreme Court to the Court of Appeals and from the Court of Appeals to my trial court. But one day when I went to court, the judge actually gave me the criminal code of procedure that I'd asked for.
Was it difficult to get access to the things you needed in order to help people and in order to help yourself defend innocence? Was it difficult to get access to records of the trial, to police records, to witness testimony, all the things that you need to investigate in order to reopen a case and then set up a defense?
Yeah, so one of the biggest obstacles that we face is in providing legal assistance to people on the inside is getting access to their records. In Louisiana, we have a law that says that people like me is not considered to be a person for the purpose of accessing our records. In Louisiana, persons have a constitutional right to public records. However, they passed a law like in 1994 that says, look, people like Calvin, that convictions have already been upheld, they are not considered to be a person for the purpose of getting public records. But even prior to that law, police reports wasn't public records, district attorney files wasn't public records. It wasn't until 1990 that the Louisiana Supreme Court said that district attorney files are considered public records. And when we tried to get access to those records, they charge you a fee. At Angola, back when I was first got to Angola, we was only earning 4 cents an hour. And right now, it's only 2 cents an hour, and you don't even start earning those 2 pennies until you've been there for 3 years. But yet, you have a 1-year deadline. So once the court ruled that district attorney files was public records and police reports are public records, investigative file is public records, the difficulty was how we going to pay for it. My case is detailed in the book. I used to donate my plasma just to save enough money to buy my records. But the difficulty in obtaining records is that we cannot leave the prison to go to the court and say, let me review the files. We don't make enough money in incentive wages to actually purchase the records. One page of a trial transcript is between $1 and $3. And sometimes the records consist of thousands of pages. The sad part about all of that is once we do get the records, the court, like in my case that detailed in the book, the court told me, well, you should have been got those records. And then my case was procedurally gone.
Wait, they told you should have already had the records?
Yeah, they said, yeah. My judge said you should have had those records like 30 years ago. Not even considering that first I couldn't get my records. When I got in a position to save enough money to get my records, I got some of the records, but by that time I was already procedurally gone. And I'm gonna go back a little farther. That like in 1990 when the Louisiana Supreme Court said district attorney files, police department files, investigative files of public records, Louisiana also passed a law that gave us 1 year to file into court. But then at 1 year, we were still struggling to get access to our records.
Right, you only had, your deadline was 1 year. After this law, you couldn't file for any kind of appeal after 1 year.
Yeah, so prior to that, it was no time limitation. But in 1990, they passed a law that gave people like me 1 year to file an application application for post-conviction relief. During that period, we were still struggling trying to get our records. And by the time we did get our records, that 1 year had already run. And for the most part, a lot of people cases was denied because the application was filed untimely.
So, like, everything was working against you in your life. I mean, the law was not up on your side in terms of helping people get an appeal or helping yourself. And, you know, you mentioned that legally you weren't considered a, you know, quote, person in prison. Legally, like, in order to get transcripts of the trial and things like that. And one of the lawyers even said to you, no, I'm not going to work with you because legally you're not considered a person. How did that feel when you were told that?
Well, that was a very painful statement for the lawyer to tell me, and that lawyer was actually the director of the organization that's duty and function is to provide legal representation for indigent people like myself. And so when he wrote me and told me that, I said, you know, it was like, God, that's pretty sad. No wonder we not very successful in the Court of Appeals in proving that our conviction was unconstitutional, because here is a person that's a director expressing what the law expressed, that I was the person. That was very sad.
Well, let me reintroduce you. If you're just joining us, my guest is Calvin Duncan, co-author of the new book, Jailhouse Lawyer. We'll be right back. This is Fresh Air. He co-authored the new book, The Jailhouse Lawyer. It's about how he was unjustly convicted of robbery murder, was sentenced to life, and served 28 and a half years in prison, mostly at the Louisiana State Penitentiary in Angola. In Angola, he studied law and became an official jailhouse lawyer, helping to free other unjustly convicted men, including himself. So I want to ask you about a Supreme Court decision that overturned something that really surprised me. I didn't know that this existed, that in Louisiana, until the 1991 Supreme Court decision, in Louisiana, you didn't need a unanimous jury to convict somebody in a criminal case. All you needed was for 10 people to vote for a conviction, but 2 people could disagree and they'd still be convicted. And I just want to quote what Adam Liptak, who is the Supreme Court reporter for the New York Times, wrote in a piece about you. He wrote a piece about you, and in that, he said, the non-unanimous law passed in 1898 after the Supreme Court ruled that states couldn't exclude black people from juries. Louisiana held a constitutional convention. The chair of the state's Judiciary Committee said the purpose of this was, quote, to establish the supremacy of the white race in this state to the extent to which it could be legal and constitutionally done. So the chair of Louisiana State Judiciary Committee just said it. He said this is to establish the supremacy of the white race.
Yes. And so in prison, I didn't know that part. What I did know was that some of the people that I was trying to help that was innocent, their verdict was 11-1, 10-2. And so 1 and 2 jurors had it right, but because of Louisiana non-unanimous jury verdict, they were still convicted. So in the process of researching that issue is a case they call State versus Apodaca, that the court said, well, Louisiana and Oregon, that the law is good. But the rest of the country, their law is fine as well, which require all of the jurors to agree. So in prison, I still was raise issues saying, look, in this guy's case, the jury verdict was non-unanimous. Therefore, it's unconstitutional. It violates the 6th Amendment right and the 14th Amendment right. The court generally always denied. But when I got out of prison, I came across the article that says that Louisiana law that allows non-unanimous jury verdict was introduced for the sole purpose of preserving white supremacy. So I went to one of the lawyers that worked at the organization where I worked at, Ben Cohen, and I showed it to him. And I said, we got to do something about this. I didn't know that the law was only introduced to preserve, make sure that black folks didn't count if they wound up getting on a jury. And he said, well, if you know cases where people was convicted by non-unanimous jury verdict, well, we'll litigate the case and we'll do it pro bono. And so Ben and I actually worked on the non-unanimous jury cases. What we do is once the person appeal is affirmed, we would petition United States Supreme Court and I really tell the Supreme Court, look, you all approved this in 1972, but did y'all know that it was introduced for the sole purpose of preserving white supremacy?
It says go down there and make a U-turn and you're there.
Time, the court constantly will reject our petition. But on the 23rd petition, the United States Supreme Court said they would hear this issue.
Can you bring it back up real quick,
case that they granted to hear the issue was Ramos versus Louisiana. And in 2020, the United States Supreme Court agreed with us that Louisiana law was unconstitutional because it violates the Sixth Amendment right to a jury verdict.
See, I think it's remarkable that you're responsible for initiating that case. And after the 23rd petition,
there, so we just took down
it
there on
finally
Street, right?
got to the Supreme
Right there,
Court,
Luxie, all the beaches.
and that law was
So
overturned.
this exact one, right, Madeline?
You have such persistence. You have
So
such
just go there first,
persistence.
right?
And you've had such persistence in the face of such odds. Like when you were in prison, you worked for years and years to get your case reopened and have a meaningful appeal. And there kept being roadblocks, even when things looked really good, something ended up standing in your way, even if it was at the last minute. And you kept persisting. Where did that come from, that persistence?
What I firmly believe is that we all entitled to hope. And how you make sure you keep hope and make sure other people maintain hope is to provide. Like I said earlier, Louisiana, we don't have a right to a lawyer. And so you have all these people convicted by non-unanimous jury verdicts, and we know that the conviction is unconstitutional. And so I believe that once we know that an injustice has occurred, I think it's the obligation of every person to keep on educating people, telling people, look, this law is creating harm. This law is unjust. And despite the fact that you might have one or two people that totally disagree with you, or might have 100 people that disagree with you, I believe that at some point, that God is going to intervene and perk their hearts and minds and say, look, at least let's consider the issue. And so my persistence comes in that just believing that if you give people an opportunity to do the right thing, that they would do it. Sometimes it takes a long time for that to happen. But history has shown that it actually happens, and you just can't give up in spite of being told no, especially when you know you're right.
So after the non-unanimous jury law was overturned by the Supreme Court, did that open up the door to filing appeals on behalf of incarcerated people who were convicted by non-unanimous juries?
Yeah, so in Louisiana, those people that had non-unanimous jury verdict that was still on direct appeal, meaning that they had been convicted, but their cases is still under review on appeal. Those individuals was granted a new trial. As a matter of fact, Ramos himself, he was granted a new trial. And he was retried, and a unanimous jury found him not guilty. So in Louisiana, everybody that was on direct, that case was still pending on appeal, their conviction was vacated, and they was afforded a fair trial. But those individuals who was not pending on direct appeal, our Louisiana Supreme Court said that they should die in prison. The legal way of saying that is that, look, we're not going to allow denying
private,
that
Mama.
jury verdict. It
You
seems
can't
to
park
be
in people's
applied
driveways.
retroactive to cases
Somebody can do it.
that was convictions had already been finalized. However, when Oregon was faced with the same question, the Oregon Supreme Court said because those convictions are unconstitutional,
So where do you want to go? You want to walk right there then, or you want to go somewhere
it
else?
ruled that
Let's go where
Bravo
this
versus
parking,
Louisiana
right?
in Oregon is
All along here,
retroactive.
see that? He's got to find a parking out there somewhere. You know what I mean?
Unlike Louisiana, people in Oregon are being granted full trials, and the people here in Louisiana,
So go to the end,
they're
huh?
told that they have to
And then I'll find a parking, right?
Well, let me read.
You have to park on the street or wherever.
If you're just joining us, my guest is Calvin Tompkins, co-author of the new book, Jailhouse Lawyer. We'll be back after a short break.